Imagine a single line, tossed out with the kind of arrogance that fills a room faster than sound, turning an ordinary municipal hearing into something that would shake an entire city. The courthouse always felt different in the early hours. The benches still held the coolness of the night, their varnished surfaces etched with years of elbows and waiting. A few people murmured in low voices, shuffling papers, adjusting jackets still damp from the morning drizzle. Then the door hinges groaned, and the quiet shifted. He entered. Mid-twenties, tall, polished jacket, phone still lit in his hand. He didn't look at the clerk or the judge, his eyes scanned the room as if he were deciding which table at a restaurant offended him least. Even the way he breathed felt entitled, a soft impatience directed at everyone present. People recognized him instantly. The son of that CEO, the one whose face appeared on billboards about innovation and leadership. Conversations tapered into silence, replaced by that particular stillness that comes when ordinary people realize someone very used to winning has stepped into their world. The judge greeted him with the same calm he offered anyone. "Sir, please step forward." The young man didn't move any faster. He remained standing instead of taking a seat, tapping the corner of his phone against his palm. The clerk read the charges: parking in a fire lane, ignoring 3 mailed notices, accumulating penalties he still hadn't addressed. A routine case, until he opened his mouth. "Can we make this quick? I've got more important things to deal with." It wasn't loud, but it landed. A few people turned in their seats. Someone muttered an incredulous, "Wow." Even Judge Caprio paused, not offended, not angry, simply recalibrating what kind of morning this was about to become. "Sir," the judge said evenly, "please state your full name for the record." The young man didn't lift his eyes. Can you talk to my assistant? She handles my everything." A ripple moved through the room, half disbelief, half amusement. Heads tilted. Brows rose. A woman in the back gave a soft, knowing laugh. Caprio leaned forward slightly, and his tone cooled, not sharp, not raised, just unmistakably precise. "In this courtroom, I speak to people. Not to their assistants." For the first time, the young man looked up. The judge opened the folder before him. The papers inside were thicker than expected. One corner was marked with a red tab the clerk had added minutes before the hearing. When Caprio slid it free, a single sheet separated itself, something that didn't belong to a simple parking case. A photograph. A timestamp. A location tied to an emergency call. The judge's gaze shifted from the page to the young man. The room, sensing the change, leaned into the silence. This was no longer about a parking ticket. Not even close. "Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel." Judge Caprio let the silence breathe before speaking again. His voice, calm but weighty, met the young man with a kind of steady warmth that made excuses harder to spit out. "Sir," he said, "you act as though the world bends around you. Am I mistaken?" The young man shifted his stance, suddenly less anchored. "I just don't have time for all this," he said, waving vaguely toward the papers, the courtroom, the people. It sounded confident, but something underneath wavered, thin, almost brittle. Caprio didn't press. He simply observed, the way he had done thousands of times before. "People with too little time," he said softly, "usually carry more than they admit." The remark hit deeper than expected. The phone finally lowered to the young man's side. For the first time since walking in, he looked like someone who didn't know whether to run or stay. He exhaled. "I grew up busy," he said, as if trying the word for the first time. "Private schools. Schedules. Tutors. Drivers. Dad always said the world is a machine, you either manage it or it crushes you." "And your mother?" Caprio asked. A long pause. "She hasn't been around for years," he answered, the bravado thinning at the edges. "She left early. Illness. Then, she passed. Dad didn't talk much about it." The room shifted almost imperceptibly. The smug young heir was suddenly someone with shadows behind him, not just money. Caprio turned a page in the file. This isn't your only violation. 14 infractions in 12 months. The young man's jaw tightened. My father's accounting team handled those. I didn't even see them. There it was, the second crack. A life where consequences were paperwork handled by strangers. And he doesn't know you're here today? Caprio asked gently. A bitter smile touched the young man's face. He wouldn't care. He thinks anything under 6 figures is a distraction. That sentence hit the room like cold air. People exchanged glances, not pitying, not judgmental, simply recognizing a truth that money couldn't soften. Neglect wears 1,000 expensive masks. From the back row, a woman's voice rose unexpectedly. Judge, may I speak? Heads turned. It was the older neighbor who had been watching him since he walked in. She stepped forward, steady but emotional. I knew this boy when he was little. His mother adored him. When she got sick, I helped after school, cooked him meals when no one else did. Her gaze slid to him, not angry, not accusing, just sad. Your father never told you everything. The young man blinked, stunned. You knew my mother. The woman nodded slowly. Caprio watched the scene unfold, his expression softening. Sometimes, he said to the young man, we arrive in court because of a parking ticket, but the real reasons run much deeper. The young man swallowed hard, shoulders sagging as if some unseen weight finally settled instead of floating above him. The folder lay open between them. 14 citations. Ignored notices. A boy raised in privilege but starved of truth. And as the judge quietly closed the file, the room felt it. This hearing was no longer about what happened on the street. It was about what happened in his life. Judge Caprio leaned back slightly, fingertips pressed together, studying the young man as though the case file had just begun speaking a language only experience could translate. Sir, he said quietly, something about this doesn't add up. The young man stiffened. What doesn't add up? Caprio slid one of the reports forward. For starters, this signature. He tapped a form where a looping, elegant script sprawled across the bottom line. Is this yours? The young man hesitated too long. I was in a hurry. My assistant probably signed that one. A few people in the audience exchanged looks. Others smirked under their breath. Everyone had seen the confident prince walk in, now they watched the seams of his story pull apart. Caprio lifted another document. The penmanship was completely different, sharp, rushed. And this one? He swallowed. That's also her. Your assistant seems very busy living your legal life, Caprio murmured. Tell me, do you ever deal with the consequences yourself? The young man looked away. The earlier arrogance was thinning into something fragile and uncomfortable. Before Caprio could continue, the courtroom doors creaked open. A patrol officer stepped inside, the same one who had been standing quietly by the wall earlier. He cleared his throat. Your Honor, I'm the one who issued the citation that brought him here. A ripple traveled through the room. The officer approached the bench, but his tone wasn't confrontational, just steady, grounded, the voice of someone who had seen far too much in far too many neighborhoods. I need to correct the record, he said. It wasn't just a parking violation. The young man exhaled sharply. Why are you doing this? It's just. The officer cut him off, not with anger, but with truth. You blocked a fire hydrant. We had an active fire 2 streets over. My partner and I lost 5 minutes maneuvering around your car. The room froze. 5 minutes. For older listeners in the crowd, neighbors who had seen fires, emergencies, tragedies, it meant everything. The judge's expression didn't change, but the weight behind his eyes deepened. The officer continued, when I asked you to move the vehicle, you didn't even look at me. You just said. His jaw tightened briefly. Write the ticket. My father pays your salary. A collective murmur washed across the courtroom, a blend of shock and disappointment. The young man's face went pale. "I didn't mean, it came out wrong. I was stressed." Caprio raised a hand, not to silence him, but to slow him down. Stress doesn't create character. It reveals it. The young man rubbed the back of his neck, suddenly restless. "Judge, I wasn't trying to put anyone at risk. I didn't think. That," Caprio said, cutting gently, "is the problem. You didn't think." He let the word settle. Not cruel, not loud, just true. The judge then turned to the older neighbor, still seated in the gallery. "You said his father didn't tell him everything. Were you referring to this case?" She shook her head. "No, Judge. I meant his life." Her voice quivered softly. "His mother used to worry he'd grow up believing rules were for other people. She told me once, she hoped someone strong and decent would challenge him one day. Someone who'd force him to see beyond the bubble he was raised in." The young man closed his eyes for a moment, as though the air had suddenly grown too heavy to breathe. Caprio watched him carefully. "Sir, I'm not interested in embarrassing you. I'm interested in understanding what brought you here in the first place." The young man spoke barely above a whisper. "I'm trying. I just don't know how to be anything other than what he made me. No arrogance now. No stiffness. Just a young adult unraveling in front of strangers, finally acknowledging that his life, polished, privileged, perfectly arranged, had built him like a sculpture and forgotten to give him a spine of his own." The judge paused, his voice softer than before. "Then let's find out who you are without him." And for the first time since the hearing began, the young man didn't resist. He simply nodded, as if something inside him had shifted just enough to let the truth in. The courtroom had barely settled after the patrol officer's testimony when Judge Caprio asked, almost cautiously, "Is there anyone else present who can clarify what happened that day?" It was meant as a formality. But then, a hand rose from the middle row. A woman in a simple cardigan, maybe in her early 50s, stood up. Her palms trembled, not from fear but from the weight of something she'd been carrying far too long. "I own the cafe across from that hydrant," she said softly. "I brought something. I wasn't sure I'd ever get a chance to show it." Even Caprio's eyes widened a bit. "You have evidence?" She nodded and held up a small flash drive. "My cameras caught the whole thing." Gasps swept through the audience. The young man blinked fast, as though the room had suddenly tilted beneath him. Within moments, the clerk connected the drive. The projector hummed, and the courtroom lights dimmed just enough to make the screen glow with a cold, unforgiving clarity. The footage began. There he was, striding into frame behind the wheel of his glossy SUV. He slowed, saw the bright red curb and the hydrant, paused for half a second, and then smiled. Not a malicious smile. A casual, thoughtless one, the kind that says I get to do what others can't. On the video, he lowered the window and tossed a line to someone off-screen. "Firefighters get days off too." A ripple, a stunned, horrified ripple, moved through the spectators. The young man whispered, "No, I didn't." But the video kept playing. He stepped out, adjusted his jacket, checked his phone, and walked away without so much as glancing back. Then came the detail that changed everything. In the background, the camera captured the front of an ambulance pulling into the street, shifting awkwardly as it tried to navigate the narrow angle. Its wheels turned, reversed, turned again. The driver's arm stuck out in frustration. Every second felt heavier than the last. Somebody in the back row muttered, "Dear Lord." The ambulances, the hydrants, the fire lanes, these things mean something in America, especially to an older audience. They remember disasters, emergencies, neighbors saved in the nick of time, neighbors lost because help arrived too late. Judge Caprio leaned forward, elbows on the bench. He let the video finish in absolute silence, then asked the clerk to pause on the frame showing the ambulance struggling behind the illegally parked SUV. He looked at the young man, not with anger, but with a depth that made the boy shrink in place. "Son," Caprio said quietly, "do you understand that these seconds could have been the last moments of someone's life?" The young man tried to speak, but when he opened his mouth nothing came out. His throat tightened, his breath hitched. He lifted his hand as if to explain himself, then lowered it, defeated. I didn't know," he finally whispered. "I didn't know." Caprio didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "Not knowing," he said, "isn't the same as not being responsible." The young man's chest heaved. He ran a hand through his hair like he was trying to comb the truth out of himself. The facade he walked in with, that cushion of status, protection, entitlement, collapsed under the pressure of what he had just seen. The cafe owner sat down slowly, tears glinting in her eyes, not from anger, but from a year's worth of frustration finally given a voice. The courtroom remained frozen in a fragile stillness. Even the teenagers waiting for speeding cases were staring with unusual solemnity. Caprio exhaled through his nose, long and controlled. "We'll take a short recess," he announced. "Not for the court, but for you." He looked directly at the young man. "You need 5 minutes to sit with what you've just witnessed. Make use of them." Then he stood, robe swaying, and the gavel tapped lightly, almost gently. The young man didn't move. He stood rooted to the courtroom floor, staring at the paused frame of the ambulance and his own car blocking its path. For the first time since stepping into the room, he wasn't thinking about his schedule, his image, or his father. He was thinking about the weight of a single careless moment. And the life it could have cost. When the recess ended, the room felt different, quieter, heavier, as if everyone's pulse had slowed to match the weight of what they'd seen. Judge Caprio returned with several folders in hand, their edges worn from years in storage but their contents freshly relevant. He sat, adjusted his glasses, and said, "During the break, I asked my clerk to gather additional records involving this young man. We need the full picture." The young man straightened in his seat, bracing himself. He expected a fine, maybe another sharp rebuke. He did not expect the judge to place 3 documents gently on the bench like pieces of a long-buried puzzle. "Here," Caprio said, tapping the first page, "is the list of your 14 prior violations. All paid, all resolved, none by you." A murmur rolled through the courtroom. He set down the second page. "This," he continued, "is a correspondence from your father's company. The corporate accountant wrote to your father, 'Your son has again blocked emergency access. Should I take care of it?'" Then Caprio read the reply aloud, just 3 words. "Handle it." "As always." Gasps, sharp and disbelieving, broke through the silence. The young man flinched as though struck. Caprio wasn't finished. He lifted the third document, an incident report from the fire department about the same day the boy blocked the hydrant. "I've called someone who can speak to this," the judge said. A woman in a paramedic uniform stepped forward. She looked tired, not from the day, but from years of work that rarely received applause. She introduced herself and continued in a steady, professional tone. "We were responding to a call for a 79-year-old man having difficulty breathing. Our route took us past that hydrant. Your vehicle slowed us down by 3 minutes and 18 seconds. The number stung the room like a siren." She added, almost reluctantly, "We saved him. But minutes matter. They always matter." She didn't accuse him. She didn't scold. She simply stated the truth, and that truth landed harder than any lecture could. The young man lowered his head. His shoulders trembled. "I didn't think. I never thought it could affect something like that." Then, almost to himself, "I've never handled anything. Everything was always covered." Caprio folded his hands. "And that," he said gently, "is why you're sitting here today. Not because of a hydrant, or a fee, or even those 14 violations. You're here because this is the first time your actions have returned to you." He closed the final folder and pushed it aside. "I now understand your situation. I see the pattern, the neglect, the pressure, the lack of accountability. And I see the young man beneath all that, one who might still change if given the right moment. He paused, letting the silence settle. That moment, Caprio said softly, has arrived. The room held its breath. The young man looked up, eyes rimmed red, waiting for whatever came next. The judge nodded once. It's time for a decision. The judge didn't speak right away. He let the weight of the moment stretch, the way a conductor raises his hand before the final movement. The young man stood frozen, hands clasped, every remnant of arrogance drained from him. At last, Judge Caprio leaned forward. Before I give you my decision, he said quietly, I want to tell you something my father told me when I was just about your age. The courtroom stilled. He worked long hours in a little neighborhood restaurant. One evening a well-dressed man came in and said, "Move those folks. I'm in a hurry." My father looked him straight in the eye and answered, "In this town, we wait our turn. Whether you wear overalls or a tuxedo, you're still a person." Caprio's voice softened. That lesson carried me my whole life. I believe it might help you, too. The young man blinked rapidly. He didn't try to wipe his eyes. He simply listened, absorbing the first true guidance he had heard in years. Caprio continued, "Now, as for your penalties. I won't impose the maximum. Fines alone won't change a man raised to think consequences can be outsourced." A few people in the gallery murmured in surprise. The boy's breath caught. "Here is what will happen," the judge said, lifting one finger at a time. "First, you will pay $500 for each of your 14 violations. That totals $7,000. You will pay it on a structured schedule so it comes from you, not your father's accountant." The young man nodded quickly, as though grateful simply to have a figure he could own. "Second," Caprio went on, "you will complete 40 hours of community service, not anywhere, but at the fire station you obstructed. You will sweep floors, wash trucks, organize supplies, whatever they need. You will look the men and women who protect this city in the eye and understand what your choices cost them." The crowd murmured again, this time in approval. "And third, after your service, you will deliver personal apologies to the paramedic team and to the cafe owner whose video brought the truth forward. Not scripted, not coached. Your own words." The young man swallowed hard, but didn't object. For the first time, the responsibility looked like something he wanted to carry. Then came the final pivot, unexpected, disarming. He asked, voice cracking, "Your Honor, may I say something?" Caprio nodded. "I'm grateful," the young man said, stumbling over the word as if it were foreign. "I've spent most of my life pretending I knew everything. Today's the first time I understood anything at all." A tear ran down his cheek, but he didn't hide it. "I won't waste this opportunity." A hush fell across the room. Even the officers by the door stood still. Judge Caprio answered with a quiet firmness that cut through the silence. "Remember this day. Not because of what you did wrong, but because of what you decided to do right. Justice doesn't punish, it redirects. It shows us the road when we've lost our way." He lifted his gavel slightly. Case resolved. People rose from the benches as if compelled by something larger than protocol. The paramedic gave the young man a small, sincere nod. He returned it with a shy, almost awkward smile, one untouched by entitlement. Outside the courtroom, sunlight spilled through high windows, catching dust in the air like slow-moving stars. The young man walked out without his phone in hand, shoulders no longer rigid with practiced arrogance. For the first time, he looked like someone beginning, finally, to grow into his own life.